Let's do a comprehensive deep dive on what an RMD, or required minimum distributions, how they work. We're going to do a live example using Stan and Ellen, and all the information will be hypothetical, but this clarity will let you know how you can survive and thrive in retirement by understanding your RMDs. And we're going through the common mistakes, the key steps that you can make, the lifelong security if you do this properly, and we're going to do this all through the example of Stan and Ellen. But let's go. Before we do, I want to show you the exact math of how RMDs work. So this RMD spreadsheet just basically shows how an RMD works. We're starting with $1 million. And you can see about your first year at the age of 73, your RMD percentage is 3.65, requiring you to take out $36,000 and change. Now every single year, your percentage is going to go up. Why? Because this is a ratio between what you have left and trying to give some kind of normalcy to the payments. That's why I can see the majority of these payments are staying in the $36,000, $35,000, $33,000 range until the age of 85, when they estimate you're probably going to pass away. That's when they know, typically, that if you're a male and you make it to 65 years old, you're going to live to 84. If you're a female, it's going to be 86, according to a Harvard study. That's why they want the most normative payments then. The ratios of your RMDs go up every single year, so your percentages go up, but the ratio of payments stay approximately the same. So if you're a little bit worried about your RMDs, they're actually fairly consistent. The things that start to change is what happens with a year-end balance. Well, that's the part that can be slightly confusing, because should the market drop and you're pulling it out, well, of course you need to take out less money because your ratio to the RMD is less. Conversely, if the market goes up substantially, your RMD percentage is exactly the same, but your payout will be different. And that's why there has to be planning in regards to your RMDs, and how much money to take out is part of that ratio. And it can be confusing, I'm not going to lie. So to first help you understand your RMDs in relation to yourself is, what are your spending goals? How much money do you need to live on month by month? And this is going to be very important for you. And I think a really good baseline is to see what you've spent over the last 2 years. And that will give you a very clear picture. Now, of course, if your mortgage and the mortgage goes away, your spending is going to go down because there's no mortgage. So you have to make some changes. Now, if you're just about to retire and you have more plans to travel, you need to factor that in as well. So in the case of Stan and Ellen, they needed approximately $6,000 a month to retire, and that created for them just a baseline of income that they felt solid in retirement. Important to calculate is your healthcare costs. Now there's two kinds of calculations you have to make. First is your cost today, and then also what is going to be your cost tomorrow. Now that is a slight uncertainty, but I can give you a slight ratio that might help you make sense. If you look, for example, in the case of Stan and Ellen, they wanted to allocate $800 per month before the age of 65, before their Medicare kicked in. Now, once their Medicare kicks in, then what happens is then they know that their Part A and B are covered, and if they want any additional coverage, of course, they have to get the Medigap coverage, or they get Medicare Advantage. But of course, you need to get a Part D plan, because if you don't, you have a penalty. So when you look at your healthcare costs, you should look roughly at about $8,000 a month before you're retired. And then after retirement, it might cost you roughly $4,000 with Medigap and your Part D coverage. Now that can change state by state. If you're in a state that has no medical underwriting, for example, some states like New York, there's no medical underwriting where you can change from Medicare Advantage or Medicare Supplement, then the costs of Medigap go up substantially. In states that have underwriting, you probably can't change if you get sick, but the cost of Medigap go down substantially. So you have to kind of factor that in. Now that is a state-by-state question. I can't give you an answer. Now what I mentioned before about understanding how much money that you're going to need in the future for Medicare, anything that you're trying to look at how things are going to cost in the future, especially when it comes to medical costs, I would say it's going to go up anywhere from 6 to 8% a year, 8% being the more aggressive, 6% being conservative, because medical costs have always gone up well past the rate of inflation, and that's something you need to factor in. The next thing you have to factor in is, what is going to be your budget for traveling for the year? Now, I would say for many people, you should make some kind of baseline that your travel expenses will fit under, and that could probably fit anywhere from 10 to 15 years, because as you start to age and you start going slower, you're going to be traveling far less. But if you can create a baseline, that will typically, as you start traveling less, but bear in mind, inflation starts creeping in, so that therefore I'd keep that budget relatively the same. In the case of Stan and Ellen, they wanted to travel very extensively, and their budget was for $18,000 every single year for travel. The next thing is trying to calculate your income, whether you're going to do a 4% withdrawal, a 5% withdrawal, use an annuity, use a bond ladder. You have to figure out what that's going to be if you want more security, if you want more stability. I don't know what's best for you when it comes to your income. That's up to your personal needs, but you need to make a backbone, some degree of stability that you know what your income is going to be year in and year out. Now, one thing that you're going to feel very stable about is Social Security, because that is pretty stable and there is a cost of living adjustment. That's something you need to factor in when you're looking at how you can start calculating your RMDs and how that's going to help you understand the bigger picture of how much money you need to withdraw safely. The next thing to factor in is how you're going to strategize Social Security. For some people, they want to get the maximum income they possibly can out of their Social Security, knowing it's a stable form of income. And depending on how old you are, that's also going to maximize how much income your spouse can get if they're going to be on a spousal support of Social Security. You have to then go and look at how much money each spouse would get individually versus how much your spouse would get if they're on spousal support versus getting it individually. You have to just do the math and figure out which one's going to be better. There's no right answer. It's just literally a math equation. And then your next equation is how much income do you want to plan from out of Social Security? Because Social Security, again, gives stability and gives the cost of living adjustment. And it's very important to strategize your Social Security because it can make a massive difference. Here's one more thing to know. And here's an interesting statistic. If you start taking your money out at age 62, the break even in Social Security is at age 78. So once you're over the age of 78, you're receiving more money in Social Security and your total amount of income is break even at 78. Now, if you're 80 years old, the break even is at 80. It's a little over 80 years old. This way, again, it'll help you to know what the total income you're going to get in a break even perspective is. The next thing you have to calculate is what is going to be your withdrawal rate from your retirement account. Now, if you want to do a traditional withdrawal method, a safe rate of withdrawal is anywhere from 3 to 4%. Now, you can be more aggressive at 5%, but there is a risk of the sequence of returns risk wiping you out. It is very real, especially if you have a 1% fee with whoever isn't doing your investments. So 3 to 4% is pretty safe. If you want to use an annuity, you can then calculate typically anywhere from 7 to 8%, depending on how you want to use the annuity. It just depends on how you want to strategize your income in retirement. But once you know what that income base is, that will help you with your RMDs. Now, if you're going to start withdrawing from your equities, you have to adjust. This does not apply to the annuity withdrawal. If you plan on pulling your money out of equities and not using an annuity, using the 3 or 4%, that means you have to adjust when you take out your money. In bad years, you might take out less money, and in good years, you might take out a little bit more money to adjust and get to that 3 or 4% to be safe. So this is what you have to do, is you have to adjust your portfolio based on the years of what's going on in the market. This wouldn't apply to annuity, but this definitely applies to how you look at your money with equities. Now, the next step is looking at what's called a stress test, which means looking at the performance of how things, especially if you take your plan and apply it to certain years in the market. You might want to look at the worst years in the market or the best years and come up with a plan that you think is best for you and based on your risk tolerance. By having that stress test, you can know if what you're doing is safe. Now, this does not apply too much if you're using an annuity, but if you're taking the money out of equities, this is a required thing you have to do to make sure that what you're doing is safe moving forward. Don't base yourself on hypotheticals if you're drawing from equities. Now, if you're drawing from annuities, one thing to be careful of is inflation. Now, it is true that if you compare an annuity versus a 4% rule, your break even between inflation and when you're going to break even with the annuity is 92 years old. So with the traditional withdrawal method of the 3 to 4%, which is safe, there's more of a dynamic effect of when you start drawing money out, but not in the case of an annuity. An annuity, you either take out that 7.5%, which is the rates currently going today, or what you do is you ladder the annuity to trigger more income in future years. The next thing you want to do is monitor your plan. You should have checkups to see if what you're doing is matching up to not only your goals, but what's happening in reality as far as inflation, as far as what's happening in the market. These things are dynamic, things outside of your control. So having those checkups, especially a yearly checkup, if the market's being more crazy, maybe quicker than a year, but you need to know what's going on. And this way you feel confident in your plan that what you're doing will last and you have the confidence of enjoying yourself in retirement. Now, there are 3 common pitfalls when it comes to looking at your RMDs and when you take the money out and how you plan your income. And these 3 things that I've seen over and over again is overestimating how much growth you're going to get out of the market. A lot of people, especially when you talk to them, they think of the terms of how what their portfolio has done in the realm of averages. And averages are a horrible number to base it off of, because you cannot base your portfolio on averages, but actually the real number is the compound annual growth rate, CAGR. That is your real number of growth. And if you look at the compounded annual growth rate, for most people, it's usually 6.5%, not the 8 or 9, because average rates don't apply, especially when it comes to sequence of returns risk, and you're drawing money out of your account. The second thing that I also see is when they underestimate healthcare costs. Now, I mentioned before, healthcare costs go up much faster than inflation. That's something you have to be made aware of. Now, the Social Security fund is, in theory, to be depleted by 2034. It appears as if their only recourse is to continue to raise Part B premiums. And then if it starts to do that, you'll find it becomes harder. And also, when you're looking at your Part B premiums, it typically well outpaces your COLA you're going to get from Social Security, and it's something you have to factor in. And that ties into the third thing, which is just inflation. Inflation right now has been going roughly at 2% a year. I factor things at 2.5% because inflation is just going up faster. If you look at the last 3 or 4 years, it has been significantly increasing, especially when it comes to housing, food, healthcare costs. It's not slowing down. We're paying over $1 trillion a year just to our debt, but that's something you have to factor in when you're looking at your entire portfolio and making sure you're being planned out properly. And that's why I think these 5 steps are so important to you, whether it comes to clarifying what you need, having the annual reviews, knowing how to maximize your benefits, maybe maximizing your income, maybe using an annuity, not using an annuity, depending on how much money you want to leave to heirs. There's a lot of questions that you might want to do. If all your goal is just to have the most fun and get the most income, you might want to use an annuity. If what you want to do is leave the most amount of money to heirs, you might want to start going more of the traditional distribution route and using less income from your qualified funds, and then focusing how you're going to use those RMDs and reinvest them and increase your Social Security, and then take less money to use as income. There's no right or wrong solution. It's what's best for you, and no one can tell you that except for what you want to do in retirement. And if you want to see if we can help, click the link down there in the comments and we can see if we can help you. It just takes 1 second. I'm Michael Solimanto. I'm an enrolled agent by the IRS, and I specialize in retirement, and I hope this helps you.